Right after the funeral of my mother-in-law, whom I cherished as my own mother, I received a letter from her. The letter was delivered to my home by a lawyer named John. My name is Emily, and I am 43 years old. The letter began with, "If this letter has reached you, it means I am no longer in this world. I am worried you might be crying." The familiar handwriting of my mother-in-law made tears well up in my eyes. Originally, my father-in-law, whom I never met, had passed away quite young, long before I married James. And it seemed there were almost no close relatives in his family, with virtually no interaction with them. James and I were not blessed with children, so we lived a modest yet happy life with just the three of us, my mother-in-law, James, and me. Especially, my mother-in-law and I had a great relationship, to the extent that James would say, "It's like you two are the real mother and daughter. And I'm the son-in-law." Last year, after James passed away from cancer, leaving just my mother-in-law and me, she suddenly became a victim of a traffic accident. There were many mysteries surrounding the accident. For some reason, she was found collapsed on a road in a different city, far from home, with no known connections, and was hit by a passing car. The police are investigating it from both an accident and a criminal perspective, but the bag she was supposed to have with her hasn't been found. I was questioned by the police too, but there were so many things I didn't understand, and I was too shocked to respond properly. Coping with the sudden loss of my mother-in-law has been really hard. In James's case, we had a year of battling his illness and did everything we could for his treatment. And having my mother-in-law there allowed us both to fully mourn James. We had overcome our grief together and vowed to continue living closely, just the two of us. I was distracted by the funeral and all the bureaucratic procedures, but once everything was over, I suddenly felt very lonely. Both of my parents, who had a family history of cancer, have already passed away. I have a brother, but he lives in a distant countryside with his family. Even when I feel like talking to my old friends from my student days, it's hard to reach out as they are all busy with their kids. Just when I was wondering what to do next, I received a phone call from a man claiming to be a lawyer. Judging by his voice, he seemed to be around my mother-in-law's age, maybe in his 70s. He apologized for being late in learning about my mother-in-law's death and said he had something important to deliver to me as soon as possible. Is it a letter from my mother-in-law? I had never heard that my mother-in-law was in contact with a lawyer. And the idea of receiving a letter from someone who has passed away was baffling. I thought it might be a scam, but if it really was a letter from my mother-in-law, I decided to meet with John. The letter read, "You must be surprised by this sudden letter, but please listen. You are in danger. Believe my words and run away immediately." Upon reading this far, I asked John, "Do you know the contents of this letter? Was my mother-in-law targeted by someone?" The handwriting was definitely my mother-in-law's. Her distinctive style was unmistakable. But the content made no sense to me. It seemed like something out of a drama, almost like a cruel prank. My mother-in-law had died in a traffic accident, but the driver had already been caught. He testified that he found my mother-in-law lying on the road, which delayed his discovery of her. I had been told that she had signs of being hit and probably lost consciousness because of that. If this letter was true, then my mother-in-law knew of someone who had assaulted her. Did she know she was involved in an incident? Then why didn't she run away? I felt tears welling up again. John, composed, said, "I haven't seen the contents, but I think I can guess what it's about." A bit irritated by his roundabout way of speaking, I asked, "So, what did my mother-in-law tell you, John?" "Yes. I was the lawyer for William, and she asked me to help you." "Who is William?" John explained that James actually had a brother 6 years older than him. I had never heard about this from either my mother-in-law or James, nor had I seen any pictures. The lawyer took out a file that looked like documents from a bag placed beside the table. "Did you know, Emily, that half of the heinous crimes in our country occur within the family?" Ironically, the most comforting and supposed happiest place, the family home, is where tragic incidents occur. "Where a dear family member takes the life of another," he said. Showing me an old photo, there were 4 people in it. In the photo were what appeared to be a young couple with a boy and a baby. The young woman was recognizable as my mother-in-law. At first, I thought the young man was a stranger, but he bore a resemblance to James. The boy's face also had features of the young man, clearly showing a family resemblance. They must have taken this photo during a trip to the sea. At the port, with a large ship in the background, all of them were smiling happily. That boy with the float is William, right? John said. Looking at the boy, I thought of James's brother, whom I never knew. Despite the apparent happiness in the photo, I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart, wondering what had gone wrong. Does being his lawyer mean William caused some trouble? Was he the one who attacked my mother-in-law this time? I asked. It must have been at least 15 years ago, around 17 or 18 years if I include the time James and I dated. Otherwise, it would be strange that I knew nothing about it. Yes, William started to withdraw from society due to bullying when he was in the first year of middle school, and 7 years later. He caused an incident, John explained. After becoming a recluse, William became despondent about his future and attempted a murder-suicide with his family. On the night of the incident, he entered his parents' bedroom with a knife. Awakened by the noise, his father grappled with him. His father was seriously injured but managed to subdue William. The incident ended in an attempted crime. However, during the struggle, his mother's screams woke 14-year-old James, who called the police. Police cars and ambulances rushed to the scene, causing a commotion in the quiet residential neighborhood. At that time, words like recluse and neat were becoming social issues. And it seems the media sensationally reported it as a reclusive youth planning a murder-suicide with his family. I thought it sounded familiar but had no idea it was about James's family. Similar news was frequently reported. But the actual people involved couldn't just let it go. Unable to bear the rumors, James' family moved several times, almost like fleeing in the night. Whether due to his severe injuries from that time or subsequent stress, James's father passed away a few years later. James and his mother changed their names to his mother's maiden name and finally settled in their current location, leading a normal life. Both the perpetrator and the victims are family, so in such cases, there's nowhere for the emotions to go. You can't just outright hate or resent someone. It's confusing for anyone to suddenly be in such a complex situation. And living under public scrutiny, rumors, and bashing is incredibly harsh. I hope you can understand the feelings of the deceased who couldn't tell you about this, John concluded. I was speechless at the overwhelming story. I had never thought about what happens to a family after such an incident, but life goes on as long as you're alive. For his parents, William was also their beloved child. In the photo John showed me, William, who looked a lot like James, was smiling. But the misaligned button that led to the worst tragedy remained uncorrected. Afterward, William was sentenced to prison. John continued, as I mentioned earlier, I was William's lawyer. Even in attempted crimes, the same penalties as completed ones apply. With imprisonment of no less than 5 years and up to 20. I interrupted him, a minimum of 5 years? Does that mean William might have already been released? Yes, he was actually released about 2 years ago, John confirmed. According to John, the prosecutor's office has a system called victim notification. If you apply after the judgment is finalized, you can be notified about the perpetrator's scheduled release and the fact of their release. Even so, my mother-in-law was William's biological mother. She had been informed about his post-release residence. Around that time, James's cancer was discovered, and he was undergoing treatment, my mother-in-law, not wanting to worry him. Couldn't discuss it with James. William told me that he committed the crime out of despair about his future, but John hesitated a bit before revealing, it seems it was actually for money to play games. William, having been a recluse for many years, had started secretly using his mother's credit card for online gaming and shopping. He was frequently scolded by his father for this. On the evening of the crime, he had spent a substantial amount of money on game weapons, leading to his computer being confiscated. William lied to John about the reason for the crime, and his father, mother, and James, who knew the truth, said nothing. Did the family, hoping that William would sincerely reflect and serve his sentence, choose not to disclose the internal strife to protect him from further defamation? In fact, my mother-in-law had occasionally visited William in prison. Each time, she returned disappointed, finding that he showed no remorse and hadn't changed. She was afraid of living with William again after his release. Not only the threat of violence, but also knowing that if her son or she passed away, William would likely come to me for money. As his release date approached, the paperwork became more complicated. Deciding where he would live was another issue. The worried mother-in-law consulted John, who helped with the procedures. "Where has William been living for the past 2 years?" I asked. John informed me that through him, my mother-in-law had rented an apartment for William and provided financial support. He apparently did his shopping online. She had given him money from her savings, her retirement funds, and even the inheritance she would receive upon James's death. After his release, William reverted to being a recluse and didn't work. When my mother-in-law, through John, conveyed, "I couldn't support you forever and wanted you to work," William vehemently refused. He said, "Doesn't Mom care about me at all? She always favored my brother. Not giving me money is his doing." John recounted. Of course, the accident might have been a coincidence, but the deceased was worried that William might do something. "He kept persistently asking me for money," John added. William had been aggressive even towards John, inquiring in detail about his mother's income and the current lives of his father and brother. "It concerns me that the deceased was found near William's apartment. Fortunately, he doesn't know our address, but..." At that moment, I remembered the missing bag. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone else but John. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, heading to the door. A bad feeling crept over me. Through the peephole, I saw a man who looked like James standing there. In his hand, he was holding a bag that my mother-in-law used to carry before she passed away. I stepped back and returned to the living room to alert John. "I think that might be William. He's holding his mother's bag." My voice quivered with tension, and John's face tensed. "Call the police now." His expression seemed to urge, but in my panic, I dashed out the back door and ran to the nearby police station. Had my mother-in-law and James anticipated this situation in the future? Or did they unconsciously choose a house near the police station? Now, it's unclear. When the police officers I brought with me arrived, William tried to flee but was caught and taken in for questioning. The man who looked so much like James was indeed William, my brother-in-law. John had referred to him as William, and having seen the old family photos, I too had called him that, but in reality, he was an unhealthy-looking middle-aged man. The resemblance to James annoyed me strangely. This man had caused so much suffering for my mother-in-law and James. I came here just to get my share. There's an inheritance from Mom, right? And I heard that my brother died last year. Give me my share of the inheritance. William yelled at me, ignoring the police officer's questions. I couldn't believe his audacity. I felt sympathy for his troubled childhood, being bullied and dropping out of school. But his subsequent actions were selfish and unforgivable. Above all, I wanted to confront him. "You're holding your mother's bag, aren't you? What did you do to her? Did you harm that frail woman?" My question drew the attention of the officers to the bag William was holding. He tried to hide it, but it was too late. One of the officers reached for it, and William even tried to bite the officer. "Hey! That's my money. What choice did I have? Mom said this was the last time." She was being insolent. So I just hit her a few times to teach her a lesson. I was horrified by William's mindset. He was completely irrational and unrepentant. And then he turned to me, "Hey, you're my brother's wife, right? Both Mom and my brother are gone. You have the obligation to take care of me now." Maybe my mother-in-law and James had feared this situation, and that's why they didn't tell me about William. They thought if I didn't know, I wouldn't get involved. "No, Emily has no such obligation." John interjected, but I doubted that law meant anything to William. He was the ultimate, invincible person, with nothing to lose. Unbound by common sense or law. Maybe that's why my mother-in-law never wanted me to meet him. What a difficult life she must have led. I hadn't finished reading the letter, but my mother-in-law, knowing her life was in danger, had left it for me, worrying about my safety. Her suffering and sadness were heart-wrenching. "Because of you, my mother-in-law and James suffered so much. I will never forgive you. You will face the full extent of the law." Certainly, the immediate cause of her death was being hit by a car. But he had left her unconscious on the road. He was not someone who should be free in society. I vowed to make sure he was sent back to prison. Seeing my determination, John stood beside me and offered, "I will help you with this." William was taken away by the police. Based on the blood and circumstantial evidence found in my mother-in-law's bag, he was identified as the perpetrator and ended up back in prison. Back home with John, I finished reading my mother-in-law's letter. It was filled with apologies and love for me. Especially the ending, "Life is still long. Emily, you deserve to live a happier and freer life," brought me to tears.